when we talk about environment, we talk about what individuals can do. From small things like closing your tap and reducing water usage and using less plastics and things like that. But I also think the most important thing is that we have to look at policy change. We have to make the governments listen to us. Because individuals no longer can stop what is happening to the world. The whole world has to think differently. The governments have to think differently. And this indiscriminate and the killing of the nature, the environment has to stop. And for that, policy change, in state levels, in national levels, all over the world has to happen. And from a person, an officer of the government, to do this, and it's not easy for a government officer, IAS officer, to talk about environment, to talk about natural farming. I understand how much he should have gone through. Because sometimes when we raise questions about environment and climate change, it's like, talking to the walls sometimes. So I can understand that because the only thing a government understands, and I think it is fair enough also, is that we have to feed the entire population. Nobody should go hungry. So that is the basic premise in which most of the governments work. And there is a fear that if you move to natural farming, organic farming, sustainable farming, then the food production will become less. And then we will be stuck. And we will not be, and people will be going hungry. So that is why I think this using of chemical fertilizers have been brought in and pushed down the throats of the farmers and the people. I used to be in the committee of for chemicals and fertilizers as a chairperson, and every time we travelled and met farmers, we always saw that the more urea you use, the crops look much better. I don't know why, it's not always the case that the yield is better, but the crops looks greener and better, and they feel, more secure and safer, and they believe that the production is going to be much better. So when they are advised to use 50 kilos, they empty the entire sack into the field. So one whole sack of urea is emptied into the field, and this is what we've been encouraging the farmers to do also. So finally, I think the department had to reduce the number of kilos in a sack of urea to reduce the amount of urea which is being used. Same when it comes to the pesticides. Because the fear is there that the crops, the production is not going to be as much as it has to be. And an Indian farmer, is always in debts. So this has been pushing people to use fertilizers, to use chemical fertilizers, to use pesticides more than what is needed. And I'm not saying that there is any need to use, but still, even much more than what. And what happens to, of course, when you consume this food, it goes into our system. And what happens to the rest of the fertilizers, the pesticides, everything which is in the soil? When there are rains, it goes into the sea. So now we ensure that these pesticides, these fertilizers, these chemicals are there in the air, in the water, in the seas, in our soil, in our food, and in our bodies. So this is like a vicious cycle which goes on and on and on, and it's just not food production. In everything, when we look at power sector, we are still pushing for thermal power. Understand that what damage we are doing to the entire world. And at this point, it is amazing that somebody has been able to stop this. When Mr. Vijay Kumar spoke, he said 14% of their farmers have stopped using pesticides and chemical fertilizers, and they've shifted to natural farming. I think it's a really, it's 1% when you talk about it in the larger scale of things, but I think it's a huge number when we look at other states and other places. Because to convince a farmer who's, again, I like to say, always in debts, always lives with fear about tomorrow, to convince them and to make them understand that there is an alternate way, and to ensure that nothing goes wrong, and to ensure that 14% of a state's farming community has the confidence to shift. I think that is an amazing achievement, and I really hope I'm going to take him on his invitation, and because I come from my constituency, Thoothukudi, it's always water-starved. If anybody happens to travel that side, if you look down from your plane, you can always see light, dark, and red color patches of land, and that's all mostly what you see from the flight. That is Thoothukudi for you. So for places like this, I think it is very important that we have to look at sustain, because paddy or sugarcane and most of the kind of agriculture we are doing today is water intensive also, and we are starved for water. There are so many disputes, there are so many issues, and the problem is the truth that we do not have enough water for cultivation, for drinking, and with climate change, the problem is intensifying. So different alternate methods which are sustainable has to be taken into account, because with climate change, food production in the traditional methods, which we come to believe as traditional, is going to suffer to a great extent. And always when there's a change for the worse, it is always the people who are underprivileged who are going to be the worst hit. And when there are climate refuges, people are, we know with climate change and water, the seas rising, people in the coastal areas are going to be affected the most. They have to move because their homes are going to be eroded because of the water rising. The fisher people are going to be the worst hit first. So when there are going to be climate refugees, and how are we going to deal with their food needs? How are we going to solve the issues which they face? So we have to think about alternate methods. We have to think about sustainable methods of life, just not food production. And like when Dr. Soumya spoke, and she mentioned that there is an eco-anxiety in the minds of all the younger people we see today. They think there's no future, no hope. When you talk to them, there's so much anger against us because they believe that we've ruined the earth for them. So I think it is fair that people who've done this to them have to stop, think, and start changing the way we think, and start changing our policies and do our best to stop climate change and give back this earth the way they deserve to have it. Thank you.
செய்திகளை உடனுக்குடன் தெரிந்து கொள்ள உங்கள் கரம் டிவியை சப்ஸ்கிரைப் செய்யுங்கள். அதோடு பெல் பட்டனையும் கிளிக் செய்யுங்கள்.